Ethan Carter was a self-made millionaire who prided himself on excellence and top-tier service. When complaints surfaced about one of his restaurant branches, he knew he had to step in. To avoid attracting attention, Ethan decided to go undercover and experience the establishment as an ordinary customer. Dressed modestly, he walked into the restaurant on a dreary afternoon. The rustic interior had potential, but it was clear the place lacked proper upkeep. Tables were misaligned, and the floor desperately needed cleaning. Before he could take in more details, a waitress named Sophie approached him. Despite the clear pressure of a busy shift, she greeted him with a warm smile and an inviting demeanor. Sophie led him to a table by the window before hurrying off to serve other customers. Ethan quickly observed how tirelessly she moved, efficiently managing orders and attending to guests, making up for the obvious staff shortage. Though exhaustion showed on her face, she still made sure to check on every customer, ensuring their needs were met with a kind word and unwavering professionalism. As Ethan took in the restaurant's atmosphere, he couldn't help but notice the tense dynamic between Sophie and the manager, a sharp-faced man who barked orders without an ounce of gratitude. Yet, Sophie remained committed, performing her duties with dedication. Ethan ordered a simple meal and used the wait time to analyze how the restaurant functioned. When his dish arrived, Sophie, though visibly rushed, made sure to check that everything was to his satisfaction. He reassured her that it was, and she gave a small smile of relief, showing how much she genuinely cared about the guests' experiences. Despite her relentless work ethic, it was obvious to Ethan that poor management was the root cause of the restaurant's struggles. As he stepped out, one thing was clear: Sophie was the backbone keeping this place together. But he needed to dig deeper to fully understand the situation. Determined, Ethan vowed to return and find solutions, starting with learning more about the humble and hardworking waitress who had unexpectedly caught his attention. Sophie had always believed that life was full of highs and lows, but in recent years, it felt like the lows had piled up far too high. At 28, she was a single mother to two beautiful twin boys, Leo and Max, just 4 years old. When she first found out she was pregnant, she had hoped her boyfriend would stand by her side. But reality had other plans. He left the moment he heard the news, running from responsibility without a second thought. Since then, Sophie had dedicated her life to her children. They were her world. Leo and Max were Sophie's greatest joy and strength, the reason she found the determination to push through each day. She often wondered if life would ever become easier. But she quickly reminded herself that she wasn't alone. She had her boys, and that was more than enough. Sophie had taken the job at the restaurant to make ends meet. Her daily routine was a whirlwind. Early in the morning, she would drop her sons off at the neighborhood daycare before rushing to catch the bus to work. The pay wasn't much, but she did everything she could to give her children the best life possible. At work, Sophie was known for her kindness and the way she treated every customer who walked through the door. To her, each guest mattered, and she made it a point to welcome everyone with the same warm and genuine smile. Perhaps that was why so many regulars always requested to sit in her section. It made a difference to be served by someone who truly cared, someone who didn't just see customers as orders to be taken, but as people deserving of respect and attention. Even so, her days at the restaurant were far from easy. The staff was constantly overwhelmed, and her manager only added to the stress. He was relentless in his criticisms, nitpicking over the smallest details while never once acknowledging how hard she worked. But Sophie refused to let his attitude break her spirit. Deep inside, she held on to a quiet hope that someday her dedication would be recognized. From the very first day he stepped into the restaurant, Ethan had been watching all of this unfold. Disguised as an ordinary customer, he remained unnoticed. Yet with each visit, he became more fascinated by Sophie's work ethic. No matter the obstacles, she carried herself with grace, filling the space with an energy that was impossible to ignore. One afternoon, Ethan witnessed something that solidified his admiration. A customer, seemingly unhappy for no real reason, complained about their meal. Instead of becoming flustered, Sophie handled the situation with an effortless professionalism. She listened patiently, her expression calm, and did everything she could to resolve the issue, all while maintaining her usual kindness. Ethan knew how difficult it was to stay composed in such moments, yet Sophie made it look natural. Every visit left him more intrigued. How could someone stay so focused, so kind, in such a demanding environment? Then it hit him. This wasn't just a job for her, it was a mission. Through every small act of patience, through every smile and moment of attentiveness, Sophie was trying to make the world a better place, even if it was only within the walls of this restaurant. And that was what kept Ethan coming back. There was something about her, an unshakable spirit that he rarely saw in others. He wasn't yet sure what to do with these observations, but one thing was clear. Sophie wasn't just an exceptional employee. She was the heart of this place. And whatever solution he envisioned for the restaurant, she would have to be a part of it. Days passed, and Ethan continued to visit in disguise, each time growing more impressed with Sophie. But one evening, something was different. The restaurant was packed, every table occupied, conversations filling the air. Sophie was moving faster than ever, rushing from table to table, doing everything she could to keep up with the overwhelming demand. Despite the chaos of the evening, Sophie continued serving every customer with her usual warmth. From his usual spot by the window, Ethan watched her closely, concern growing with every passing moment. He could see how overwhelmed the kitchen was, and he knew Sophie needed support. But it was clear that support wouldn't be coming from her manager. That was when Marcus, the manager, stepped in. His posture, his expression, the very way he carried himself, spoke volumes about the kind of man he was. Confident, perhaps too much so, as if always looking for someone to blame for his frustrations. Ethan sensed the tension in the air as Marcus marched towards Sophie. "Sophie, that VIP table is complaining again," he barked, his harsh tone drawing uneasy glances from nearby diners. "I'm doing my best, Marcus. The kitchen is completely backed up and—" Sophie started, but he cut her off before she could finish. "Your best isn't good enough." His voice dripped with disdain. "The wealthy customers are the reason this place stays open. If you can't handle them, maybe you should find another job." Marcus's cold gaze locked onto Sophie's, his words sharp enough to cut. Ethan saw the flicker of hurt in her eyes, but she quickly masked it, struggling to maintain her composure. "And don't forget," Marcus continued, his tone condescending, "regular customers are just a detail. What matters is the money they bring in. Now, do your job right, or you know the consequences." His words landed like a blow. "Yes, sir, I'll do my best," Sophie replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan could hear the tremble in it, could see her fighting back tears. A knot formed in his stomach. Watching this unfold, seeing Sophie endure such blatant mistreatment, made his blood boil. He couldn't stay silent. "That's not fair," Ethan said, his voice firm as he rose from his seat. Even he was surprised by the force behind his own words. What was he going to do now? Reveal his identity, or continue his disguise? Marcus turned, his expression one of pure annoyance. "And you are?" he asked, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Just a customer," Ethan replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "But I can't sit here and watch you treat an employee with such disrespect. She deserves better than this." Sophie's eyes widened in surprise, a flicker of nervousness crossing her face. "You don't have to," she began, but Ethan silenced her with a small gesture. "Sorry, Sophie, but I can't stay quiet," he said firmly. Marcus looked between them, as if debating whether this was even worth his time. He scoffed. "Listen, buddy, things run according to my rules here. If you don't like it, you're free to leave," he said, crossing his arms. "Sophie needs to learn to prioritize the customers who actually matter." A wave of anger surged through Ethan. "Do you really believe a person's worth is measured by how much money they have?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with quiet intensity. "If you can't respect your own staff, then maybe you're the one who needs to reevaluate." Sophie, still visibly shaken, felt torn between gratitude and worry. She didn't want Ethan to put himself at risk for her. "Please," she said softly, placing a hand on his arm. "It's not worth it." "No, Sophie," Ethan replied, his voice unwavering. "It's time someone spoke up." Marcus, however, wasn't about to back down. "If you've got a problem," he said, his voice thick with arrogance, "you're welcome to leave and never come back. We don't need customers meddling in our business." Ethan crossed his arms in a firm stance, taking a deep breath. He knew he was in a difficult position. He wanted to stand up for Sophie, but he also understood that any move he made could escalate things further. Keeping his gaze steady, he said, "You know, Marcus, I might leave, but not without saying this. You are the reason this restaurant is losing customers. One day, someone will have to look in the mirror and ask why the staff are always unhappy." Marcus frowned, his expression darkening, but Ethan didn't waver. He turned to Sophie, who still looked shaken. "Sophie, please don't ever forget how much your hard work means to the people here. Your dedication is valuable. Don't let him make you feel otherwise." Marcus was growing impatient. "That's enough. You're not here to lecture us," he snapped. "If you don't like my rules, you're welcome to leave." "Maybe I should," Ethan replied, stepping toward the exit. His frustration was boiling inside him. He hated the idea of walking away while Sophie was left to deal with this toxic environment. But he wasn't the only one who saw what was happening. "I'm not the only one who notices this," he continued, turning back to Marcus. "When customers feel mistreated, they remember, and when they stop coming, that'll be on you." Sophie didn't know where to look. She felt torn, worried about the situation, but also grateful that someone was finally speaking up for her. "Ethan, you might get yourself into trouble," she whispered anxiously. "Marcus can be ruthless." "Maybe it's time for things to change," Ethan said, his voice unwavering. "You deserve to work in a place where you're treated with respect. No one should have to endure what you go through every day." His eyes remained locked on Marcus. Marcus had reached his limit. His face twisted in anger. "Enough. If you don't walk out of here right now, I'll call security." Ethan took another deep breath, realizing that the situation had escalated beyond control. He glanced at Sophie, sensing her growing concern, not just for him but for herself as well. He didn't want to put her job at further risk. "It's okay, Sophie. I'll leave," he said calmly before turning back to Marcus. "But know this, I won't be intimidated by someone like you. What you're doing here is shameful, and if you have any dignity left, you'll reflect on it before it's too late." With that, Ethan walked out. As he stepped into the cool evening air, he felt a mix of relief and frustration. A part of him wished he could have done more, pushed back harder. But he also knew that speaking up had been a start. Inside the restaurant, Sophie stood frozen, her heart pounding. She longed for a sense of security, but something had shifted inside her. Ethan's words had struck a chord. How much longer could she put up with this humiliation? She knew she had to take action. This wasn't the last time Ethan would set foot in that restaurant. He couldn't just walk away from what had started. He had to find a way to help Sophie, not just as a customer, but as someone committed to making a real change. After the heated confrontation between Ethan and Marcus, not much changed in the restaurant's atmosphere. Sophie still faced the same exhausting days, the same unrelenting pressure. But something inside her felt different. A fire had been reignited. As for Ethan, he knew he couldn't simply move on. He wanted to keep supporting Sophie, even if in subtle ways. With every visit, he paid closer attention to the details. One particularly busy afternoon, Ethan noticed Sophie struggling to manage a large table while simultaneously handling a long queue of pending orders. It was clear she was overwhelmed, yet she kept pushing forward, determined to do her best. Recognizing how much she had on her plate, Ethan decided to take a simple, yet meaningful step. "Hey, Sophie," he greeted as she hurried past his table, her arms full. She turned, surprised. "Ethan? Oh, sorry I didn't see you there," she said, forcing a quick smile before moving toward another table. "Is there anything I can do to help?" he asked, standing up slightly. "I'd be more than happy to assist." She blinked at him, caught off guard. "Help?" she repeated, shaking her head. No, I don't want you worrying about that. It's just another busy day. Besides, Marcus wouldn't exactly be thrilled about a customer stepping into the kitchen." She pressed her lips together in a nervous smile. "Of course you can handle it," Ethan said reassuringly. "But don't worry, Marcus won't even notice. How about I go to the kitchen and grab a few drinks for you? That way, it's one less thing for you to worry about." Sophie hesitated, glancing around. For a moment, it looked like she might refuse, but then she sighed, a genuine smile breaking through. "All right," she relented, her eyes sparkling just a little. "If you think you can handle it." Ethan grinned. I think I'll manage. He headed toward the kitchen and returned moments later, carefully balancing a few drinks. As he handed them to her, he felt an unexpected warmth at the gratitude on her face. Thank you, Ethan. You have no idea how much this helps, Sophie said sincerely. From that moment on, Ethan continued making small gestures like these whenever he could. A quiet bond began to form between them. He would often ask about her children, what Leo and Max were learning at daycare, what their favorite games were, and if she had any plans for the weekend. Whenever Sophie talked about them, her eyes softened with love, and Ethan found himself enjoying every word. One quiet afternoon, Ethan sat at his usual table when he noticed Sophie sitting in the corner of the restaurant, looking utterly drained. Without hesitation, he stood up and walked over to her. Hey Sophie, how are you feeling today? He asked gently. She looked up, startled. Oh, Ethan, you didn't have to leave your table because of me, she said, attempting to mask her exhaustion with a small smile. I'm here for this, he replied, sitting across from her. You don't look well. Is the workload too much today? Sophie let out a heavy sigh. For a moment, it seemed like she might open up. Just tired, she admitted. You know how it is. The way Marcus runs this place, the pressure never stops. It's always something. And no matter how hard I work, the only thing I ever hear from him is criticism. A shadow of sadness flickered in her eyes. Ethan clenched his jaw, anger stirring inside him at the injustice of it all. That's not fair, Sophie. You work so hard, and yet this is how you're treated. She gave a small, weary shrug. I know, but what can I do? I need this job to take care of my kids. I can't just walk away. Her voice held quiet despair. Sometimes I just wish things could be easier, for me and for them. Ethan looked at her then, really looked at her. And in that moment he realized something. His feelings for her were growing stronger with each passing day. You're an incredible woman, Sophie, he said softly. I admire your strength. I know it's not easy, but you're not alone. I'm here, and I'll do whatever I can to help. Sophie's tired eyes filled with something that looked like hope. Thank you, Ethan, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Having someone who cares, it really makes a difference. Being a single mom, it's a constant struggle. I have to hold everything together, for them. Ethan watched her closely in that quiet moment, taking in the weight she carried every single day. He noticed it in the exhausted slump of her shoulders, in the faint dark circles beneath her eyes, in the tired smile she wore even when she was hurting. Yet, despite everything, she kept going. And Ethan was beginning to realize that he wasn't just here to observe anymore. He wanted to help. There was an inner strength in Sophie that Ethan deeply admired. No matter how much weight she carried, she never let it break her. That resilience, that quiet determination, inspired him to act. Maybe one day you'll have your own restaurant, Ethan said, his gaze steady and sincere. A place where you're truly valued. Sophie let out a small, wistful laugh, but there was sadness behind it. That would be a dream, she admitted, but it's hard to believe in dreams when reality is so harsh. She lowered her gaze as though the thought itself was too heavy to carry. What if I told you that every big achievement starts with a dream? Ethan asked gently. He reached out, taking her hand in his. Have you ever imagined what your own restaurant would look like? What would it feel like to run a place of your own? Sophie blinked at him, as if the idea had never fully settled in her mind before. A dream is nice, she said softly. But reality, just getting through each day here is hard enough. I'm not sure I could actually do it. I believe you could, Ethan said firmly. You have an incredible gift for making people feel welcome. That's something rare. Sophie let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but Ethan could see something shifting in her expression. The way you care about every customer is something most restaurant owners never even learn, he continued. For a brief moment, a spark of something, hope, maybe, flickered in Sophie's eyes. Do you really think I could do it? She asked, almost timidly. A place where people feel welcome. Absolutely, Ethan said without hesitation. You already do it every single day. But you deserve to work somewhere that appreciates you. Imagine your boys growing up in a place where you're the boss, where your vision is respected. That would be inspiring for them too. Sophie stared at him, emotion welling in her eyes. I don't have the resources, she murmured, her voice unsteady. That kind of life, It's something most people can only dream about. Ethan shook his head. Dreaming doesn't cost anything, he said gently. But what really matters isn't where you start, it's where you want to go. And if you're willing to take that step, I want to help you get there. Sophie gave him a soft, grateful smile, though her eyes were still misty. That's really kind of you, Ethan, she said. I'm not sure I deserve that kind of faith. It's not about deserving, Ethan said, his voice filled with conviction. It's about potential. And you have so much to offer. Hey, Sophie, I'll be here to support you, no matter what path you choose. Something between them shifted in that moment. It wasn't just words, it was understanding. A quiet, unspoken connection grew stronger with each glance, each shared silence. Thank you, Sophie finally said. Sometimes, just knowing that someone believes in you, it makes all the difference. She let out a small laugh, wiping at the corner of her eye. I feel like I'm not so alone after all. You're definitely not alone, Ethan assured her. I'm here for whatever you need. And the more time I spend here, the more I realize just how special you are. For the first time in a long time, Sophie smiled, genuinely, without reservation. It was as if a weight had been lifted, if only for a moment. Maybe I should dream a little more, she said, almost to herself. And who knows, maybe one day, this small conversation will turn into something real. Ethan felt it too. This wasn't just talk. Something meaningful was taking shape between them. He had the means to help, and Sophie was beginning to see that her dreams were valid. Together, they could create something better, not just for her, but for everyone around them. As their conversation continued, Sophie felt a shift inside herself. She wasn't just a waitress struggling under the weight of an unfair job. She was someone with a future. And for the first time in a long while, she believed in it. Sophie was beginning to see herself differently. She wasn't just a woman weighed down by pressure. She was someone with the possibility to dream. And as she looked at Ethan, she saw something even more valuable. Someone willing to walk beside her, encouraging her to believe in herself. As the days passed, Ethan couldn't get Sophie out of his mind. Each visit to the restaurant only strengthened his resolve to change her situation. The more he witnessed the oppressive work environment and Marcus's arrogant behavior, the more restless he became. He needed a plan. But how could he fix things without revealing who he really was? Sitting at his usual table, Ethan absent-mindedly scribbled ideas onto a napkin. He wanted to create a fairer workplace for Sophie and the rest of the staff, but his mind was caught between taking immediate action and the risk of exposing his true identity before the time was right. If I just fire Marcus, what happens to Sophie? He thought, tapping his pencil against the paper. And what if she resents me for keeping this from her? What if it makes things even worse? Meanwhile, Sophie was fighting her own battles, ones that extended far beyond the restaurant. Stress was knocking at her door, both at work and at home. Bills were piling up, and the daycare had just raised its fees. How am I supposed to manage all this? Sophie murmured to herself as she stirred a pot of soup, her thoughts swirling like a storm. How can I keep working like this without breaking down? That evening, she sat at the dinner table with Leo and Max, forcing a smile as they played with their food, laughing and chatting. Then Leo suddenly looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "Mommy, why do you look so serious? Isn't the restaurant fun?" The question hit Sophie harder than she expected. She took a deep breath, pushing away the lump forming in her throat. "Oh, my loves," she said, brushing a hand through his hair. "Sometimes work is hard, but that's just part of life. It's okay." She tried to sound cheerful, but she knew her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. After dinner, while the boys played on the couch, Sophie realized she couldn't keep bottling everything up. She needed someone to talk to. Without overthinking, she picked up her phone and dialed her best friend, Isabella, the one person who had always been her source of strength. "Isa, can you come over for a bit?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. "I really need someone to talk to." Isabella didn't hesitate. She arrived in no time, taking one look at Sophie and immediately sensing something was wrong. "What happened?" Isabella asked gently as they sat down together. "You look overwhelmed." Sophie let out a heavy sigh. "It's work," she admitted. "Marcus is getting harder to deal with, and I feel like I'm drowning. And on top of that, the bills, the daycare costs, I just don't know how to keep up." Her voice wavered as she spoke. Isabella frowned, concern filling her eyes. Sophie, you need to talk to him, she urged. You can't keep going like this. The pressure isn't good for you. I know, Sophie whispered, lowering her gaze. But what if it costs me my job? What if I push too hard and he fires me? I don't know what I'd do. Even though I know I should stand up for myself, I'm scared. Isabella reached for Sophie's hand, squeezing it tightly. What you need most right now is support, she said firmly. And you have it. You're not alone, Sophie. You need to remember that. Meanwhile, at a nearby bar, Ethan was lost in thought as he sipped his drink. Across from him sat his best friend, Ryan, the one person he trusted whenever he needed honest advice. Rafa, Ethan began, exhaling heavily. I'm trying to figure out how to help someone who works at one of my restaurants. She deserves so much better, and I feel awful about everything that's happening to her. Ryan leaned back, studying him carefully. Okay, but what exactly are you planning to do? He asked. You can't just walk in unannounced and reveal that you're the owner, Ryan interrupted, shaking his head. That could cause chaos. Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. I know, but she's such a great employee, and the way Marcus treats her is unacceptable. That's something I can change. But at the same time, I don't want Sophie to get hurt any more than she already has. She's struggling every single day. Ryan took a sip of his drink, considering his friend's words. Have you thought about the fact that revealing your identity might backfire? He asked. She might feel even more pressured, or worse, betrayed, if she finds out everything all at once. The truth isn't always easy to process. Ethan sighed, leaning back in his chair. He knew Ryan had a point. So what do you suggest? That I just sit back and watch while things get even worse? He asked, frustration clear in his voice. No, Ryan replied firmly. But you need to be smart about it. Maybe you can help in a way that isn't so drastic. Make gradual changes, little by little. It doesn't have to be some big dramatic moment, and when the time is right, you can tell her the truth. Ethan sat in silence, mulling over Ryan's advice. There was wisdom in his words. Maybe there was a way to make things better for Sophie without overwhelming her. The real challenge was figuring out how to do it without exposing himself or making things harder for her. Meanwhile, Sophie sat in the quiet of her small apartment, lost in thought after her conversation with Isabella. The talk had helped. Just knowing she wasn't alone had lifted some of the weight pressing down on her shoulders. But it didn't change the reality she was facing. Sitting on the couch, she clasped her hands together, staring at her sleeping boys. Their peaceful faces made her chest tighten with emotion. I want a better future for you, she whispered. In that moment, something shifted inside her. A small flicker of determination. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for them. Sophie thought back to something Isabella had said earlier. Sometimes, you just need to take the first step. Could she do it? And more importantly, how could she overcome the fear that had kept her frozen for so long? In the days that followed, Ethan continued visiting the restaurant, observing everything more closely than ever. He paid particular attention to Sophie's interactions with customers. He noticed how people in her section always seemed at ease, how they left the restaurant in a better mood than when they arrived. There was something about the way she treated each guest, with patience, kindness, and genuine warmth, that made a difference. Even on her hardest days, Sophie never let it show. Ethan admired that strength, and the more he saw, the more certain he became. He had to do something. Hey Sophie, Ethan called as she passed by his table. She turned, brushing a stray hair from her face. Oh hey, how's your day? I should be asking you that, Ethan said with a small smile. How's today treating you? Sophie sighed as she straightened a few chairs. A little better, I guess. But the work is still exhausting. The pressure never stops. Ethan nodded, then gently steered the conversation to something lighter. And at home? How are Leo and Max? Sophie's face immediately softened. They're doing well, thank God, she said, her voice warmer now. Leo has started drawing all the time, and Max is learning how to count. They make me smile, even on the hardest days. Ethan found himself smiling too. That's wonderful. Taking care of them is the most important thing, and it sounds like you're doing an amazing job. Sophie glanced down for a moment, a flicker of emotion passing over her face. I try. she murmured. Ethan watched her closely, his thoughts racing. He had to do something. The injustice Sophie and so many others faced every day weighed on him more heavily than ever. He didn't have all the answers yet. But one thing was clear. The fight was just beginning. Ethan knew he had to move carefully. Rushing into action without a solid plan could backfire, not just for him, but for Sophie as well. He needed to be smart, strategic. His focus remained on her and her vision of a better future. The support of his friends, along with the growing bond he shared with Sophie, gave him the determination to push forward, even when the obstacles felt overwhelming. It was a Thursday when Ethan decided it was finally time to act. For days, he had been planning a special meeting with the restaurant staff, carefully considering every detail. His anxiety was palpable as he double-checked his notes. "This is going to work," he murmured to himself, reviewing the message he had sent out to the employees. If everything went as planned, this could change the work environment for the better. And more importantly, it could change things for Sophie. The next morning, Sophie was in the kitchen, organizing a fresh delivery of produce when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw a notification about an upcoming meeting. "Sophie, did you see this?" Anna, one of her coworkers, asked as she tossed a salad. "The owner called a meeting for tomorrow." "Yes, I saw it," Sophie replied, setting down a crate of vegetables. "Do you know what it's about?" A slight unease crept into her voice. "No idea, but I was wondering if it's something serious," Anna said, her brow furrowed. Sophie felt a flicker of uncertainty settle in her chest. Maybe it has something to do with all the complaints we've been hearing. Or maybe it's about Marcus. Anna let out a breath. "I hope so, but it could be either really good or really bad." A few other employees joined the conversation, their voices hushed with speculation. The idea that the meeting could be about their manager lingered in everyone's minds. "The way things have been going, maybe it's time we demand some changes," one employee suggested, almost hopefully. The others exchanged looks, nodding in agreement, but there was skepticism too. The fear of retaliation loomed over them like a dark cloud. The day of the meeting arrived. The staff gathered in the small break room, shifting uncomfortably as they waited. The air was thick with tension. Ethan watched them carefully, taking in their expressions, the apprehension in their eyes, the hushed whispers passing between them. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Hi everyone, thank you for coming," he began, keeping his tone calm. "This meeting is really important to me." A ripple of restlessness moved through the room. People exchanged puzzled glances as Ethan stood at the front, looking far more composed than they felt. Sophie, standing beside Anna, felt her stomach tighten with unease. "This doesn't feel right," she whispered. Anna gave her a nervous smile but said nothing. Ethan could feel the weight of their skepticism. He took another steady breath before continuing. "I imagine many of you are wondering why I'm here," he said, meeting their gazes. "So I'll get straight to the point." He let a pause linger before finally revealing the truth. "My name is Ethan Carter. I'm the owner of this restaurant chain." A stunned silence fell over the room. "I came here undercover to understand what's really been happening," he continued, his voice unwavering. "And after observing for some time, I've realized something. This place needs serious change." Murmurs broke out among the staff. The tension shifted, morphing into shock and confusion. "I want each of you to feel comfortable sharing your opinions," Ethan said firmly. "You are the heart of this restaurant, and your voices matter." The room buzzed with whispers. Employees exchanged wide-eyed glances, processing the revelation. But Sophie stood frozen. So Ethan wasn't just a customer? Her mind raced. She replayed every conversation, every moment of kindness he had shown. Had it all been a lie? What were his true intentions? Sophie's mind was spinning. Why had he approached her this way? A storm of questions swirled in her head, confusion crashing over her like a wave. What did Ethan really want? Why had he kept this secret from her? And what else might be at stake now that the truth was out? Her uncertainty made her stomach twist, and as she glanced around the room, she could tell she wasn't the only one feeling this way. The entire staff stood frozen, eager to understand the real reason behind Ethan's unexpected revelation. Then, from across the room, Marcus finally seemed to process what was happening. His expression shifted from shock to something more calculating. He wasn't stupid, he knew his job was in danger. Wasting no time, he put on a forced smile and stepped forward. "I always suspected there was something special about you, Ethan," Marcus said, his voice dripping with fake admiration. "Your presence, the way you carried yourself, it always showed leadership." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Enough, Marcus." His voice was firm, unwavering. Marcus stiffened. "Things are going to change here," Ethan continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And the first change is you." A tense silence filled the room. "You're fired. Leave immediately." For a moment, no one spoke. Then a wave of mixed reactions spread through the staff. Relief, shock, even a little apprehension. No one liked Marcus, but still, what would happen now? Marcus's expression twisted with anger. "You won't survive without me," he snapped, his voice shaking with rage. "This place runs because of me." Ethan stayed calm. "Actually, Marcus," he said, "we'll do much better without you. Now, please leave my restaurant. HR will contact you to discuss the details of your departure." Marcus glanced around the room, searching for support, but he found nothing. The staff stood silent, their expressions unreadable. With no choice but to accept his defeat, Marcus stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The room fell into an eerie silence. Everyone was stunned, processing what had just happened. Ethan had made it clear things were going to change. But how? And what would happen next? The air was thick with anticipation, but no one dared to ask the questions burning in their minds. Sophie stood frozen, her hands gripping the fabric of her apron. She couldn't believe it. The man she had spoken to so many times, the man she had laughed with, confided in, and even begun to trust, wasn't just a regular customer. He was the owner of the restaurant. A flood of emotions crashed over her: shock, hurt, disbelief. And yet, beneath all of that, a growing admiration for his courage. Ethan could have handled this in so many ways. He could have walked in as the boss from the very beginning, but instead, he had chosen to go undercover. Why? As the murmurs continued around her, Sophie felt her heartbeat pounding in her ears. What did this mean for her? What did Ethan really want? Ethan scanned the room and immediately noticed Sophie's silence. She hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, and the look on her face, he had seen that look before. Hurt, confusion, doubt. He couldn't leave things like this. Stepping forward, he approached her cautiously. "Sophie?" She tensed slightly at the sound of his voice but didn't look away. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said, his voice low and sincere. "And believe me, it wasn't easy for me either. I had my reasons." Sophie felt a tightness in her chest, emotions twisting together. Anger, gratitude, uncertainty. "But why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why hide?" There was hurt in her words, and she didn't bother to conceal it. Ethan exhaled slowly. "I needed to see how things really worked here," he admitted. "I wanted to understand the staff, to know what you all go through every day." Sophie searched his face, trying to make sense of it all. "With the pressure from Marcus, I knew many of you wouldn't feel comfortable speaking up," Ethan continued. "If I had walked in here as the owner from day one, I wouldn't have seen the truth." His explanation made sense. It did. But Sophie still felt torn. "So, everything we went through together." Sophie's voice trembled with emotion. "So, everything we went through together, it wasn't real?" she asked, her eyes searching Ethan's face. "Were you just observing me?" The pain in her voice hit him like a punch to the gut. "No, Sophie, that's not how I see it," Ethan said, his voice firm but gentle. "Everything I did, every conversation, every moment we shared, it was real." He took a small step closer, his gaze unwavering. "I admire your determination, your work ethic," he continued. "You care about every customer, and that makes all the difference. That's why I'm here. That's why I had to do this." Sophie felt a flicker of hope stir within her at his words, but the weight of her distrust still lingered. "And now?" she asked hesitantly. "What happens now? With Marcus gone, does that really mean everything will change?" She shook her head slightly. "Be realistic, Ethan. How can you promise things will be different?" Ethan nodded, understanding her doubt. "I get it," he said. "Change doesn't happen overnight, but I am committed to making it happen." A hush fell over the room as everyone listened intently. "And today," Ethan continued, "I want to offer you something special." Sophie's brow furrowed, her nerves tightening again. "What do you mean by something special?" she asked cautiously. Ethan took a deep breath. I want to offer you the manager position." The room fell into stunned silence. Sophie's heart stopped for a second. "What?" "You deserve this opportunity," Ethan explained. "Your work ethic and your character are exactly what this place needs. You can help change the culture here, not just for yourself, but for everyone." Sophie felt the weight of his words sink in, but disbelief flooded her system. "Me?" she whispered. "But I don't have any experience as a manager. I'm just a waitress." Her voice was small, filled with hesitation. Ethan smiled, shaking his head. "Sophie, a manager isn't just someone who gives orders," he said. "A true leader understands the work, and you already do. You have a natural ability to lead, to make people feel valued. That's what really matters." Sophie glanced around at her coworkers, expecting doubt or skepticism. Instead, she saw something else. Encouragement, support. They believed in her, but still, fear gnawed at her chest. "What if I can't do it?" she whispered. "What if everything goes wrong?" Ethan's expression softened. "But what if it goes right?" he asked, a hopeful smile forming on his lips. "This is your chance to shine, Sophie, and you won't have to do it alone. I'll be by your side. Together we can build something better, a place where everyone feels respected and appreciated." Sophie's eyes burned with unshed tears. This was more than just a job offer. It was a chance to change her life, a chance to take control of her future. But the idea still terrified her. I need to think about it," she whispered, turning toward the window, trying to keep herself from breaking down. Ethan stepped forward, but not too close. "I understand," he said softly, "and I don't expect you to decide right now, but just know this. I believe in you, and whatever choice you make, I'll support you. Not just you, but your ideas too." A murmur spread through the room, and then, one by one, the employees began stepping forward. "You've got this, Sophie," one colleague said with a smile. "You're the best choice for this," another added. A warmth spread through Sophie's chest as she realized she wasn't alone. The support she was receiving was real. She took a deep, shaky breath, trying to process the flood of emotions washing over her. "Thank you, everyone," she said, her voice trembling. "You have no idea how much this means to me. I never imagined myself in a role like this." She swallowed hard. "All I've ever known is serving tables, making sure customers have a good meal." Ethan smiled. "And you're amazing at that," he said. "But being a manager doesn't mean—" "Sophie, you don't need to change who you are," Ethan said gently. "What you already do, respecting others, creating connections, that's what makes a great leader." He could see it happening. Her confidence was beginning to grow. Sophie looked at Ethan, the man who had unexpectedly turned her world upside down. "Why do you believe in me so much?" she asked, her voice still laced with doubt. Ethan held her gaze, unwavering. "Because I see something in you that many others don't," he said. "An incredible strength. You're the definition of perseverance. And above all, you care about your kids, about the people around you. That shows in everything you do." A silence settled over the room. Sophie absorbed Ethan's words, feeling them sink into her heart. Could she really do this? Could she step into this role and make a difference? Even though doubt still whispered in the back of her mind, for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine it. "I do want to make changes here," she admitted, her voice softer now. "But I can't lose focus on my boys. They come first." Ethan nodded. "And that's exactly what we admire about you," he said. "Your children are your strength, and they'll want a mom who shines, who fights for her dreams." He took a step closer. "This position, it's not just about the restaurant," he continued. "It's a chance for you to build a better future, not just for yourself, but for them, too." Sophie felt something stir deep inside her. Hope. For so long, she had been in survival mode, doing whatever it took to get through each day. But this was something else. This was an opportunity. "I want to try," she finally said, her voice quiet but firm. "But I can't promise I'll be perfect." Ethan smiled. "Don't worry about perfection," he reassured her. "What matters is that you allow yourself to try, to grow. We'll all be here to support you." He glanced around the room, sensing the shift in the air. "Let's build a strong team, one where everyone feels valued," he said. A hesitant smile broke across Sophie's face. "Maybe this really is my chance to make a difference." Ethan saw the change in her expression and felt a wave of relief. "When you're ready, we can sit down and discuss how to start making those changes," he suggested warmly. How about we brainstorm ideas together? Sophie took a deep breath. Yes, she said, nodding. I'd like that. She turned to her colleagues, seeing their hopeful faces, and something inside her clicked. For the first time, she wasn't just taking this step for herself. She was doing it with them. Thank you for believing in me, she said, her voice stronger now. I'm ready to do my best, and I hope we can all work together to make this place something special. A ripple of applause spread through the room, followed by cheers of encouragement. The energy shifted. What had once been a tense, uncertain atmosphere was now charged with something else. Excitement, possibility, a fresh start. Ethan stood back, watching Sophie as she stepped into this new version of herself. Supporting her had been the right choice. This was her time to shine. And together, they were about to transform this restaurant into something greater than any of them had imagined. The journey was just beginning. But as Sophie looked around, she no longer felt afraid. She had something she hadn't had in a long time. Strength, support, and most importantly, a new purpose. Sophie was ready. This wasn't just about taking a new job, it was about stepping into a new version of herself, not just as a devoted mother, but as a leader. After a long, emotional day filled with revelations, she sat at her small kitchen table, watching Leo and Max play with their building blocks. The decision to accept the manager position was still fresh in her mind, and with it came a whirlwind of emotions. Am I really good enough for this? The weight of responsibility pressed on her chest. Becoming the new manager wouldn't just change her work life, it would affect her personal life too. Leo and Max would undoubtedly feel those changes. She smiled softly as she watched Max try to build the tallest tower possible, while Leo carefully arranged his blocks by color, making sure each one was in perfect order. I hope I can be a manager they'll be proud of. She whispered the words more to herself than to them. For a moment, doubt crept in. Ethan's support had meant the world to her. His belief in her had given her the courage to say yes. But deep down, she was still struggling to fully trust him. The fact that he had hidden his identity was something she needed time to process. And yet, she couldn't deny that his intentions seemed sincere. He wanted to change things. He wanted to make the restaurant better. Sophie took a deep breath. We all make mistakes. Maybe this is my chance to start over. Maybe, just maybe, Ethan was offering her a real second chance. The next day, she had a meeting scheduled with him to discuss the first steps in restructuring the restaurant. As she walked toward his office, a wave of nervousness washed over her. But she didn't let it stay. With every step, she replaced it with something stronger. Determination. It was time to see if they could truly transform this place, together. When Sophie entered the office, she found Ethan organizing some papers on his desk. The moment he looked up and saw her, he smiled. Sophie, he said warmly, I'm so glad you came. Please, have a seat. She nodded, taking a deep breath as she sat down, trying to steady her racing heart. Thank you, Ethan, she said, her voice clear but cautious. I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about how how we can make the restaurant better for everyone. Ethan's expression lit up. I'm really happy to hear that, he said. I want you to know that you'll have my full support to implement your ideas. This is the moment to build a healthy, respectful work environment. Sophie exhaled slowly. His words gave her courage. I think we should start with some small but meaningful changes, she said. Like offering training sessions for the team, so everyone feels like they're actually growing in their roles. Ethan nodded, clearly pleased. That's a great idea. Giving people a sense of value and personal growth will go a long way. Encouraged by his enthusiasm, Sophie continued. And I think we need to work on communication, she said. Right now, there's no real structure, just orders being barked at people. If we held regular meetings, it could help everyone stay on the same page and avoid misunderstandings. Ethan leaned forward, clearly invested in every word. That sounds like a perfect way to make sure everyone feels heard and included, he said. Your perspective is refreshing, Sophie. For the first time since she had walked into this meeting, Sophie smiled, genuinely, without hesitation. The shadows of doubt that had lingered in her heart, they were finally starting to fade. Sophie leaned forward, feeling more confident as the discussion with Ethan continued. I've also been thinking about ways to attract more customers, she said. Maybe we could run local campaigns that highlight our signature dishes and the new, welcoming atmosphere we're trying to create. Ethan's eyes lit up with admiration. That's absolutely perfect, he said. People need to know about the changes we're making. If we can show them what makes this place special, we can build something incredible. As the meeting continued, Sophie felt something shift between them. The barriers that had once stood between her and Ethan, hesitation, doubt, mistrust, were slowly breaking down. He wasn't just the boss anymore. He was an ally, someone who believed in her, someone who was willing to build something bigger and better with her, not just for her. When the meeting ended, Sophie stood up, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "Thank you, Ethan," she said sincerely. "I know we have a long road ahead, but I feel encouraged. I believe in what we're doing." Ethan met her gaze, his expression filled with conviction. "And I'm grateful to have you by my side on this journey," he said. "Together, we'll make it work." As Sophie stepped out of the office, she took a deep breath. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about her children. About her team. About creating a place where everyone felt valued. Where they weren't just employees, but a family. That evening, as Sophie walked into her apartment, she felt something different. Energy. Purpose. Her mind was buzzing with ideas, and the anxiety she had felt just days ago had been replaced with a quiet but powerful determination. She knew balancing her new responsibilities with her personal life wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she could make it work. That night, as she tucked Leo and Max into bed, she reflected on how unpredictable life could be. Just days ago, she had felt stuck, trapped in a routine of exhaustion with no end in sight. But now, she had a chance. A real chance to change everything. As the twins drifted off to sleep, Sophie sat quietly in the dim glow of their room. She thought about the struggles she had faced, the nights she had stayed awake worrying about bills, the days she had felt invisible, unappreciated, and yet, she had made it through. She had fought, she had endured, and now she was finally stepping into something new. With a deep sigh and a quiet smile, she stood up, gently tucking the blankets around her boys' small, peaceful bodies. She felt grateful. Grateful for second chances. Grateful for the people who had believed in her. And grateful for the chance to prove that with determination and support, anything was possible. As she lay down that night, Sophie finally felt ready. Ready for whatever the future held. Not just as a manager, but as a mother, as a leader, as someone who had learned that dreams weren't impossible if you had the courage to chase them. The restaurant wouldn't just be a workplace, it would be a place of growth, a place of change, a place of hope. And this was only the beginning. The next morning, Sophie woke up feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Excitement. There was a weight on her shoulders, but she embraced it because she wasn't just showing up for another shift. She was showing up to make a difference. After getting ready and preparing breakfast, she looked at Leo and Max and smiled. This was her new chapter. A fresh start. One where she was no longer just surviving, she was leading. At the restaurant, Sophie stepped inside and took a quick look around. Her mind immediately began picturing small changes. How the tables could be arranged to make the space feel more inviting, how the lighting could shift the mood, how the energy could be warmer, better. She took a deep breath. This was it. Time to take the first step. A smile spread across her face as she called out to the team. "Good morning, everyone." As Sophie stepped into the restaurant, she could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her. For the first time, she wasn't just another employee walking through the door. She was their new manager. "Good morning, Sophie," the staff greeted in unison. Some voices were confident, others held a hint of hesitation. Sophie sensed the anxiety lingering in the air. But she also noticed something else: energy. A renewed sense of hope. She took a deep breath and smiled. "I'd like to meet with everyone in the next few minutes," she announced. "I have some ideas I'd love to share." During the meeting, Sophie spoke with clarity and purpose. "The most important thing to me is that this restaurant becomes a place where everyone feels valued," she said. "And we can only achieve that together." She glanced around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. "So starting now, I want us to have weekly meetings," she continued. "A space where we can share ideas, discuss what's working, and figure out how to make this place better for all of us. A beat of silence. Then, slowly, people started nodding. A few smiles appeared. "That sounds great, Sophie," Anna, one of the senior waitresses, said. "It's something we've all needed for a long time. I've actually been thinking about ways we can improve our service techniques." Another employee chimed in. Sophie beamed. "That's wonderful. Bring your ideas next week. I want to hear from everyone." For the first time, she felt it. Confidence. Like she had finally stepped into the place she was always meant to be. After the meeting, Ethan approached her, his expression warm and full of support. "You did an amazing job leading that meeting," he said. "The team seems genuinely excited about your ideas." Sophie turned to him, a spark of happiness in her eyes. "Thank you, Ethan. I feel like I'm finally seeing the difference we can make," she said. And it was incredible to see the team so receptive. Ethan nodded, admiration clear in his gaze. "And I can see how much you're growing," he said. "You're becoming a natural leader, Sophie." A soft warmth spread through her chest. She wasn't used to hearing words like that, but hearing them from Ethan, it meant something. As the days passed, Sophie adapted to her new role, and her working relationship with Ethan deepened. They collaborated closely, sharing ideas, brainstorming solutions, and developing new strategies to make the restaurant better than ever. Ethan often stopped by her office to discuss plans, and with each conversation, their connection grew stronger. One afternoon, as they reviewed ideas for a new menu, Sophie glanced at Ethan thoughtfully. "You know," she said, "I was thinking about adding a new dessert, something that really reflects our identity." Ethan leaned in slightly, intrigued. "Like what?" "Maybe a chocolate cake," she mused, a small smile playing on her lips, "but with a special twist." "That sounds delicious," Ethan said. "But what would make it special?" Sophie paused, considering, then her eyes met his. "Maybe some orange zest," she suggested. Something fresh, a little unexpected. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was something in the way Ethan looked at her, something unspoken, something that had nothing to do with work. And Sophie felt it too, a quiet flutter deep in her stomach. Their connection only continued to grow, and their conversations, once strictly professional, became something more. More personal, more meaningful. One evening, as the staff finished up for the night, Sophie turned to Ethan. "You've been such a great support to me," she said softly. "I don't know how I would have managed all this without you." Ethan smiled, sincerity evident in his eyes. "I'm just doing my part," he replied. "But honestly, I'm amazed by you. The strength you've shown, you should be so proud of yourself." Sophie let out a quiet breath, warmth spreading through her chest. "I am," she admitted, "but it's not just that." She hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Having someone like you by my side," she said, her voice softer now, "has made all the difference." Ethan opened his mouth as if about to say something, then hesitated. For a moment, Ethan hesitated, carefully choosing his words. "Sophie," he said gently, "you're an incredible woman. You've become such an important part of not just the restaurant, but my life." Sophie's heart raced. There was something between them, something real, something that had grown naturally, both professionally and personally. She couldn't deny it. "So many changes," she murmured, a small, shy smile forming on her lips. "I didn't expect any of this, but it's been wonderful." She took a deep breath. "I feel like I'm finally finding my way," she admitted. "And you've been such an essential part of that." The tension in the air was almost tangible as Ethan held her gaze. Then he stepped a little closer. "If you're open to it," he said, his voice steady but soft, "I'd like to explore this connection further. Not just as colleagues, but something more." Sophie felt butterflies stir in her stomach. Ethan continued, his tone unwavering. "There's a chemistry between us, Sophie, and I don't think we should ignore it." Sophie swallowed, her pulse quickening. "Ethan, I feel it too," she admitted. "But this is all so new. I'm still adjusting, balancing being a manager, taking care of my boys. I don't want anything to interfere with that." Ethan nodded, his expression warm and understanding. "I get it," he said. "And I don't want you to feel any pressure. I'm willing to wait as long as you need." His voice was calm, reassuring. "But at the same time," he added, "I want you to know that I'm here, not just for the restaurant, but for you." Sophie met his gaze, her heart pounding. "That means a lot to me," she said softly. worry about what might happen if we mix work and personal life. I don't want to make things complicated, for you, for me, or for the team." Ethan gave a small smile. "I understand," he said, "and I'd love for us to get to know each other better, outside of work. Maybe we could go out for coffee or dinner one day." His voice was light, easy, no pressure, just two people spending time together. Sophie hesitated, but the idea warmed her. "That would be nice." "Yes," she said finally. "We can talk about it more, but I do need some time to think." Ethan nodded. "Of course," he said, his smile reassuring. "No pressure at all, just let me know when you're ready." Then he stepped back slightly, giving her space to process everything while making it very clear that he wasn't going anywhere. That night, as Sophie tucked her boys into bed, her thoughts weren't on work. They were on Ethan. What if we start seeing each other? Would it affect my ability to lead? She needed time to reflect, to consider what this new development could mean for both of them. As the new week unfolded, Sophie remained focused on her role. She continued implementing positive changes at the restaurant, and the results were undeniable. The team was more engaged, more excited. A sense of unity had formed, something that had been missing for far too long. And as she dedicated herself to her work, she realized something. This is what she and Ethan had built together. Side by side, they were creating a space where everyone could thrive. And more than that, they were becoming not just colleagues, not just partners in change. They were becoming friends. Real, close friends. One afternoon, as they sat together reviewing team feedback, Sophie glanced over at Ethan. He was focused, studying the notes intently, but she wasn't thinking about the feedback anymore. She was thinking about him. Everything they had worked toward, everything they had built. A question formed on her lips before she could stop it. "Ethan," she said softly, "do you really believe we can make this place an example of respect and camaraderie?" Ethan turned to her, and without hesitation, he answered, "I don't just believe it, Sophie." His voice was full of conviction. "I know we can." He gestured around the room. "Look at how the team has responded to your ideas," he continued. "Look at the energy, the excitement. You brought that to life." His gaze was steady. "You're the reason everything is changing." In that moment, Sophie realized something. She wasn't just building a strong professional partnership with Ethan. What they had was more than that. Something deeper, something real. The connection between them had been growing for weeks, through late-night strategy meetings, through moments of quiet understanding, through the unwavering support they had given each other every step of the way. And now, it was undeniable. Ethan, sensing the shift, met her gaze with quiet intensity. "Sophie," he said, his voice steady, "I need to ask, do you feel ready? Ready to explore what we could be?" Her heart pounded, but there was no fear in her answer. "Yes, I am," she said, her voice filled with certainty. Ethan's smile widened, a flicker of excitement in his eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked, wanting to be certain. "Are you really ready to take that step?" Sophie nodded, her voice unwavering. "I am." A breath of relief and joy passed between them. And then, unable to hold back any longer, Ethan gently pulled Sophie into his arms and kissed her. The kiss was soft, yet full of promise. It was a kiss that spoke of new beginnings, of trust, of something far beyond the professional. A moment that marked the start of something neither of them had planned for, but something that now felt inevitable. A journey filled with hope, a future filled with possibilities. From that moment forward, Sophie and Ethan's lives changed in ways they never could have imagined. They had always worked well together, but now they had found something even more powerful: balance. They supported each other, both personally and professionally, creating a partnership that extended far beyond the restaurant. Under Sophie's leadership, the restaurant flourished. The team was motivated, engaged, and happy. And with Ethan by her side, she felt stronger than ever. They weren't just partners at work. They were partners in life. One special evening, Ethan decided it was time. He wanted to take their relationship to the next level. To celebrate not just the love they shared, but the life they were building together. As they walked through the local park, hand in hand, Ethan gave Sophie a thoughtful smile. "Sophie, do you remember the first time we talked about our dreams?" he asked. Sophie glanced up at him, warmth filling her chest. "Of course," she said. "You told me you wanted a restaurant where everyone felt welcome and appreciated." And I told you I wanted to make a difference in people's lives. Ethan nodded, squeezing her hand gently. Exactly, he said. And I believe that together we're making those dreams come true. Sophie's heart swelled at his words. Every day with you makes me believe we're stronger together, Ethan continued, stopping to face her. Sophie felt her pulse quicken as he reached for both of her hands. You've made me believe in myself again, she whispered. I never thought I could be this happy or have someone by my side who truly understands me. Ethan took a deep breath. And then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. He opened it slowly, revealing a stunning engagement ring. Sophie, he said, his voice full of emotion, I want you to know how much you mean to me. He met her eyes, the same eyes he had admired since the day they met. Will you marry me? For a moment, Sophie was completely still. Then her expression shifted from shock to pure joy. Tears welled in her eyes as she let out a shaky breath. Oh, Ethan, she whispered. It's beautiful. Her lips trembled as a smile spread across her face. Yes. A soft laugh escaped her, overwhelmed with emotion. Yes, of course I want to marry you. Ethan exhaled in relief, a wide smile breaking across his face as he slid the ring onto her finger. The moment it settled into place, he pulled her into his arms, wrapping her in an embrace filled with love, warmth, and promise. I can't wait to build our life together, Ethan murmured against her hair. Sophie pulled back slightly, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. And I can't wait to start a family, he added, his voice thick with emotion. Sophie nodded, unable to put into words the happiness she felt in that moment. All she knew was this. This was exactly where she was meant to be. A few months later, on a beautiful spring afternoon, Sophie and Ethan's wedding took place. Friends and family gathered, their hearts full of love, ready to witness their union. The very restaurant where they had met, where their journey had truly begun, had been transformed into a breathtaking setting. Flowers lined the space, twinkling lights casting a soft glow over the evening. As Sophie walked down the aisle, she lifted her gaze, and there was Ethan. Standing at the altar, waiting for her with the most radiant smile she had ever seen. The air was filled with warmth, with love, and as they locked eyes, they both knew. This was just the beginning. As Sophie and Ethan stood together at the altar, they gazed deeply into each other's eyes. A silent promise passed between them, one of love, of trust, of standing beside each other no matter what the future held. Sophie, Ethan began, his voice steady yet full of emotion. I promise to be by your side in every moment, to face every challenge and celebrate every joy with love, patience, and unwavering support. Sophie's heart swelled as she took his hands in hers. And I promise, she said, her voice soft but strong, to be your partner in life and love, to honor and respect you for who you are and all that you represent. The words hung in the air, touching the hearts of everyone present. As they exchanged vows and were officially pronounced husband and wife, the room erupted into cheers. The celebration had begun. That night, laughter and music filled the air as friends and family danced, toasted, and rejoiced in the love Sophie and Ethan had found. It was a night of pure happiness, a night that marked not just the end of one journey, but the beautiful beginning of another. A few weeks after the wedding, Sophie knew it was time to share some exciting news. With close friends and family gathered in their home, she felt her heart pounding as she glanced at Ethan. Taking a deep breath, she smiled. Thank you all for being here, she said, her voice warm with emotion. We have something very special to share. She looked at Ethan once more before finally saying the words that had been filling her heart with joy. Ethan and I are expecting a baby. For a brief second, the room was silent, and then cheers and applause erupted around them. Laughter, hugs, tears of happiness. Sophie felt the warmth of love surrounding them as Ethan pulled her into his arms. We're so excited to begin this new chapter in our lives, she added, overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, as they sat together reflecting on how their lives had changed, Sophie felt a deep sense of peace. This reminds me, she said softly, of how important it is to believe in people. How when we support one another, we can achieve things we once thought were impossible. Ethan looked at her, admiration shining in his eyes. Exactly, he agreed. Integrity, kindness, and love, those are the things that truly matter. And our love, it makes us stronger every day." Sophie smiled at his words, then turned to see Leo and Max playing nearby, their laughter filling the room. She looked back at Ethan, who was watching her with that same radiant smile. And at that moment, with a new baby on the way, Sophie realized something. The family she had always dreamed of was finally becoming a reality. Overwhelmed with emotion, Sophie gathered Leo and Max into her arms, pulling them close as Ethan wrapped his arms around all three of them. "We're all together," she whispered, her voice filled with warmth. "And that's what matters most." A sense of unity and love filled their home. Sophie knew life would have its ups and downs, but with love as their foundation, nothing could break them. Together, they were building a future where dreams weren't just dreams, they were real. They were possible, and every single day, they would live that truth. As they stood by the window, looking out at the endless horizon, the sound of the twins' laughter echoing through their home, Sophie and Ethan knew one thing for certain. The future held many wonderful things, and they were ready for all of it. Hand in hand, guided by love, every step of the way.